Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video I'm going to be talking about the worst books I read in 2022, so let's just get right into it. So I did just want to start this off by saying obviously these are my personal opinions. Just because I hate a book doesn't mean you're gonna hate a book, and just because I say a book is the worst book I've read doesn't mean that it's the worst book ever to be written. These are just the books that I read this year that I really did not like, and like I said, all opinionated, so just take it with a grain of salt and please don't get offended if I trash talk your favorite book. So I've mentioned a couple times on my channel recently that I feel like this year was a really bad reading year for me. I just didn't have many new favorites or books that I really loved. So this video was actually a lot easier for me to put together than my favorite books of the year video, which is kind of sad. I didn't put these in any particular order. These are just the 10 worst books I read this year because honestly, if I got into like being nitpicky about which one was worse than the other, I think I would drive myself crazy, because a lot of these books just made me really angry when I read them, and so I don't want to like get into that really. So they're not in any specific order. I'm just going to start with the ones that came to mind first basically, or the ones I saw first when I was scrolling through Goodreads. So the first book on this list is one that is going to come as a shock to absolutely no one, because I have been bashing this book since I read it, and that is Small Town Big Magic by Hazel Beck. This one I can honestly say is my least favorite of the entire year. This is the only one that I will like rank for you. This was truly terrible. It is a feminist, like witchy, it's labeled a rom-com, but honestly there's not enough romance that I think you could call it a rom-com, and it was cringy, honestly. I gave this 1 star. I absolutely hated this. I did a whole video actually on all the reasons why I hated this book, which I will link down below if you want to watch like the full spiel of me like right after I finished reading it, talking about what I didn't like. But I think that the part that has stuck with me the most about this book that I hated was, this is labeled a romance, obviously, so it's being marketed towards the romance community, and there is a scene in this book where the guy and the girl, they're kind of like making out, and you know it's like headed to a sex scene, but like right before it gets there, the character sort of like breaks that like fourth wall, and she's like talking to you as the reader, basically being like, oh, I could tell you about us getting together, but I'm not here for the objectification of people and like the glorification of sensuality for consumer commodification was the exact wording of that part of the book. And to this point in time now, months later after I've read this book, that quote still makes me so angry, because if you wanted to have a closed door book, have a closed door book. Like, nobody cares. Like, I personally can go either way. I literally don't care if it's closed door or not. But this one almost made it sound like they thought they were better than everyone because it was closed door, and they had to go out of their way to make a point of saying like, oh, basically we think all these other romance authors like shouldn't be doing that. And the weird part is, like, the 2 authors that wrote this book are romance authors. Like, they have written plenty of other books that I'm sure have sex scenes in them, and yet they were still like bashing it. Like, I saw someone say that this book almost seemed satirical, and like I could agree with that, because it was just so bad that it was like there was no way it was written as anything other than a joke. But I don't think it was, which is just sad, honestly. And the craziest part of this to me is that it's traditionally published, so like the amount of people that had to sign off on this and approve it is insane to me, and I don't know why they market it as a romance, because it just is not. If you like really hardcore feminist stuff, you will probably like this, but if you are a romance reader, you will probably read this and be offended. So do with that information what you will. I absolutely hated this book to the point that I will not read anything from either of these authors ever again, because it was just that bad. Like I said, I made a whole video on this book, and I very rarely do that, especially for books I don't like. I'm very quick to just sort of move on, but this one I just felt like I needed to get it off my chest because it was that bad. Next was The Coppersmith Farmhouse by Devney Perry. This is the first book in one of her series. I can't think of the name off the top of my head, but I know it's the first book, and I picked this up. I mean, I love the Eden series by Devney Perry, so I was like, okay, like I'll give another one of her series a shot, like maybe I'll love it as much as the Edens. This was awful. I gave this 2 stars. I don't know how you could root for the relationship in this book, because honestly to me it almost bordered on abusive. Like, the guy in this book was just, I get that they were trying to have like, it was supposed to be like that sort of possessive vibe where like he's like, oh, she's mine and no one can touch her, but like she wasn't interested in him at the beginning, and he's like, no, we're going on a date, and she's like, I haven't even said yes, and he's like, no, we're going. And I was like, okay, she can speak for herself, like we're not in the, you know, olden times here. And that bothered me. And then there's also a scene, and this has stuck with me since I read this book, this one scene in particular, because to me, if I was the girl in this book and this had happened to me, that would have been the moment that I broke up with this guy. Because she takes her daughter, she's like a single mother, she takes her daughter, who I think is like 4 in this book, to go visit this guy who is a cop in this town at work. So they're in like the police station where he's working to go visit him, and this little girl runs in, and I think she's like drawn him a picture or something, and she like runs in and opens the door, and she's like, oh my gosh, hi, like blah blah blah, and she's like yelling, and he gets scared because she like catches him off guard, and he jumps and spills coffee all over himself. And he immediately starts like cussing her out and like yelling at this girlfriend, and like just like really went off the deep end, all because he spilled coffee on himself. Like he gets so mad about it, and she just like takes it. She's just like, oh yeah, like it was my fault, like we should have like told you we were coming or whatever. And I was like, okay, what if this had been like this guy's colleague that walked in and scared him? Like it didn't have to be the kid. And that was his reaction, was like, oh, it's all your fault that I spilled coffee on myself, like what were you thinking? And that was this entire book, was him just blaming her for stuff and like yelling at her. And I was just like, I don't know how anyone could read this and be like, oh yeah, he was such a great guy, because I was literally like the entire book, I was like, okay, red flag there, yep, another red flag there. Like this book was like the perfect example of everything you should look for to avoid in a boyfriend, because he was just truly, truly awful. And there was like a couple moments in this book where I remember thinking like, oh, maybe this is where he's gonna redeem himself, and it never happened. All the way through to the end, it was terrible. He was terrible to her. Like there was nothing to root for in this book as far as I'm concerned. And I just really, really hated it. I almost stopped reading Devney Perry completely after this book, because I was like, if you can't see that that guy was borderline abusive, like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I really don't. And I don't know how so many people read that book and give it 5 stars, because it was wild. Next was Midnight Lily by Mia Sheridan. And I picked this one up because I loved Archer's Voice. I loved Most of All You. And I was like, sure, I'll give one of Mia Sheridan's older books a shot. This was the weirdest book I've ever read in my entire life. I can't even explain to you what this book is about, because I still don't really know. Like, this was one of those books that when I finished it, I had to Google it, because I was like, okay, am I like just not understanding what happened, or was it really that weird, or like what's going on? And there was so many like twists in this book that I couldn't keep anything straight. Like I didn't even know what was going on anymore, like I said. And I feel like that just ruined the whole book for me. I gave this like 2 stars, and honestly, there was like a Facebook group for this, I think, when it was released, because it's an older book, just for people to discuss like the ending, because no one really understood what happened. And I feel like if that many people have to reach out and say, hey, what the heck happened with this, like there's kind of a problem there, like maybe there should have been an extra chapter that actually explained things or something. But there was just nothing, and I finished this book being like, what did I just read? Like I literally have no clue what just happened. And that was weird. I wasn't a fan of that. Didn't like this one. Next was Some Kind of Perfect by Krista and Becca Ritchie, and I know that people hate when I say this. I actually lost Goodreads followers when I gave this 1 star on my Goodreads, but this to me was just so unnecessary and so boring and so long. Like, the only reason I can think of that this book has such a high Goodreads rating is that I think most people that would hate this book as much as I did would have bailed earlier on in the series. Like, they didn't even make it to this book, and honestly, I probably should have, because I think it was Long Way Down was the last Calloway book. By the time I got to that one, I was over it. Like, I was so bored. They were so long, and yet we weren't getting as much detail as I would think from like an 800-page book. Like, in Long Way Down, they mentioned that Daisy has finally found like her new career path she's gonna take. And it's like cool, and you find out what it is, and it's something that should be taking up at least some of her time, and yet the entire book is just about like rock climbing. Like, you don't get any of her actually working on this thing, and then all of a sudden she's just like, oh yeah, this thing was successful. And I was like, you've literally done nothing for months. How could, you know, all of a sudden this thing you decided to do is just going great? Like, and I didn't like that, because like in 800 pages we should have seen something of what she was doing, and yet instead we got like 5 scenes of rock climbing in that book. And specifically in Some Kind of Perfect, I just found that this was like so unnecessary. The entire book is just about pregnancies. Like, every single chapter is one of them getting pregnant, having a baby, naming a baby, thinking about getting pregnant, talking about getting pregnant, like, it time jumps so many times. Like, this book takes place over the course of 10 years, I think. It time jumps so many times that you're literally just seeing all the pregnancy moments. And it was just over and over again. And you know, like, some of them have like 1 million kids. Like, it was taking forever. And I was like, I'm not even interested, because the epilogue of Long Way Down already told you how many kids everybody had and all the names and everything. So I was like, why do I even care about this? Like, I don't. This to me, like, screamed like a money grab book. Like, you know when they write like another book because all of a sudden the other books in the series have become popular and they're like, oh, we need another one to, you know, make more money. That's what this book screamed to me. It was like, it didn't belong there, it wasn't necessary, and I think they literally were just like, okay, this is taken off, we need to write another book. And I hated this one. I gave it 1 star. Like I said, I DNF'd it. I did make it to like 70% before I DNF'd it. Like, I gave it a good shot, and I just could not bring myself to care about how many times these girls got knocked up. Next was Daisy Hates by Jessa Hastings. This book was obviously one of the worst books I read this year, but like, truly, I mean that in the sense of like the worst book. Like, this wasn't just a book that made me angry or I thought was confusing, but I actually think this is like the worst, one of the worst books. It is written in a way that I could never wrap my head around. Like, I just could never be happy reading these books. I do have a full video review. I don't think it's up yet when this video goes up, but I do have a full review video of this series coming. But I found this one, the thing that annoyed me the most, and there was a lot of things that annoyed me, but the thing that annoyed me the most was how many footnotes there were in this book. Like, there were literally hundreds of footnotes, and that was just entirely unnecessary to me. Also, like, nothing happened. Like, this was the second book, so I had read 1,000 pages of this story by the time I got to this book. No one was together, nobody knew who they wanted to be with, and it was just like, to me, when you have a love triangle, it has to be like one character can be in the love triangle, right? Like, in the case of like Twilight, for example, you have Bella, and then there's Edward and Jacob. So Bella's really sort of the center of the triangle, I guess, and then you have Edward and Jacob. But like, these books are like the equivalent of if Edward then had another girl that he liked and maybe like another girl he was thinking about, and then Jacob also had like 2 girls that he was going back and forth between. Like, that's the equivalent of these books, is everybody is interested in like 6 different people and nobody likes anyone more than the other. And in this book in particular, in Daisy Hates, I think she has 4 guys over the course of this book that she is just like leading on. Like, they're all interested in her and she doesn't shut any of them down. She lets all of them think that they have a shot with her, and she just can't pick one dude. And that just really was getting irritating to me. Like I said, 1,000 pages later, we should have some sort of concrete like couple going on. And I was like, why am I rooting for her to get with Christian when Christian doesn't want her and she doesn't want Christian because she can't decide between all these guys and he can't decide between the girls. So I was like, why am I rooting for them? Like, I saw no reason to root for them, because as far as I'm concerned, they were all in one giant mess and they were just never going to fix that, and I don't really care to find out if they do fix that. So this was the last book I'll read from that author, because honestly I hated her writing style too. I thought it was really, really annoying to read, and also I just hated like the nicknames in it. Like I said, there'd be a whole video of all the things I hated, so I'm not going to keep rambling about this one. Next was The American Roommate Experiment by Elena Armas. This is a book I read for a video, sort of thinking that I might hate it, but I was willing to give it a shot, you know? And I read The Spanish Love Deception. I thought it was bad, but I thought it had potential. Like, I really thought that if she had gotten like a good editor for that book, that she could have shaved off a good 200 pages and like made a cute romance. But because of that, I was like, I'll give her next book a shot. Maybe she'll get a better editor, maybe it'll flow nicer, it'll be shorter, it'll make more sense. And so I picked this book up and it was worse. I really hated this one, gave it 2 stars. I don't know, this was just so boring. Like, nothing happened in this. It's literally about a girl who ends up being accidental roommates with this guy that she's been Instagram stalking for years, and then they like go on all these fake dates because she's writing a romance book and she needs inspiration. And it was just so boring. Like, it was, everything in this had been done before, and not just like done before, but like had been done so many times that it was like nothing in this was new or interesting. It was just a hodgepodge mix of like popular tropes or storylines or plot points. Like I said, nothing in this was original or like new, and it was all overdone, like cliches almost. And I just think like after this one, I'm done with this author, so that was on the list. Then there was A Letter to 3 Witches, and this one was just so bad. I gave this one, I want to say 2 stars. It might have been 1 star or like 1.5 stars maybe. I hated this. I still don't really understand the point of this. It's literally about a witch that's like their cousin, I think, and she tells her other cousins that she's gonna steal one of their men, basically. And she doesn't tell them which one. She's just like, I'm stealing one of you guys' men, and I'm taking him with me, and we're going to like New York or whatever. And she leaves, and then she says she's coming back to get the guy. Like, he's gonna come with her on like Friday, and it's like Monday or whatever. And she's like, I'm gonna come back and take him. But like, none of these guys are there. Like, one's on a business trip and one's like wherever. So all these girls are like, or I guess there's 2 girls and a guy, and they're all like, oh my god, she's gonna take my spouse, like, this is crazy. And it was just so stupid to me because like, they don't even really seem to care. Like, they all just sort of assume it's their spouse, and then there's like all this cheating that goes on, and it was just like really weird. And I don't know, I just didn't understand the point of this book, and like, why not just wait to see which guy she took and then deal with the problem? Like, I don't get why they spend this whole week like being frantically running around doing stupid stuff, and like, they're no closer to figuring out who it is, really. And I don't know, the whole book was just stupid. It didn't have a good plot line. I thought this was going to be one of those books where the plot line didn't really sound all that great in the synopsis, but maybe it was better fleshed out in the book, but it was just as bad as it sounds on the back. I read this for my I Read 10 Witchy Romances video, which I did in the fall, and that was why I picked it up, hoping it would be better, but it was not. And so yeah, wasn't a fan of this one either. Next was If You Ask Me by Libby Hubsher. This was again for that video that I did. I'm not sure if it's up yet. I think it may either be up already or it's going up really soon. And I did a video where I gave authors I didn't like a second chance. So I read another book from an author that I previously didn't like to see if it was any better. This book was one of those. I didn't like this one just as much as I didn't like the first book from the author. It was women's fiction disguised as romance, which I absolutely cannot stand. Like, if you want to write a romance, write a romance. Don't write a women's fiction and then market it as a romance. I hate that. And this was one of those books, and the guy in this book was actually hardly even in this book, so I don't know how you could even consider it a romance. What drew me into this one was that it starts out with her having like an ex-boyfriend bonfire, and that's how the fire department ends up there, and that's how she ends up meeting this guy. And it reminded me of the Friends episode where they have a bonfire of their ex's stuff and end up meeting the firefighters. So I thought it was going to be really cool, but like I said, the guy was barely even in this book. Like, I would guess he had like 5% to 10% of the space in this book was about him. He like literally wasn't even around most of the time, and I was just really, really bored. Didn't like it. Like I said, it's women's fiction, even though they're saying it's a romance. It's really, really not. It's a women's fiction book with a sprinkling of a romance plotline. Next was The Worst Best Man by Mia Sosa. I saw so many good things about this book, so I decided to pick it up. But I feel like when I read this to me was like the epitome of when people say they don't like traditionally published romances. This book made me realize why. And it's because everything in this was like such a like stock story. Like, there was nothing unique about this or exciting or new. It was all things that have been done a million times before, similar to the American Roommate experiment, where it was just all done before. There wasn't really any like burning chemistry that I was feeling. It was just like a very basic story. And because of that, I found I didn't connect with it. I didn't really care, and I didn't end up loving it. So this was definitely one of the books that was like most disappointing for me throughout the year, because like I said, I had seen so many people hype this up, but this to me like screamed Costco. Like, I could see this on like a Costco shelf, and someone who maybe picks up 3 romance books a year picking this up and really loving it. But like, for someone who reads like literally hundreds a year, it just was very, very basic and something that has been done a million times before. Lastly was Praise by Sarah Kate. This was another book that I read. Actually, in that video where I did the authors that I didn't love, this was the one that I didn't love originally from this author that I read. This has been very popular on TikTok and just sort of everything, I think. It's been all over the place, and I figured it would be good. I gave it a shot, and I just really didn't vibe with this one. It follows a girl who ends up dating her ex's dad, which like I'm not opposed to. Like, I really enjoyed Birthday Girl by Penelope Douglas, so I thought maybe I would like this one. But I just found it was so boring in the middle. Like, the first 100 or so pages were good, and the last like 75 pages were good. But like the 200 pages in the middle were just so boring and seemed to drag on forever. Like, nothing was happening, and I just didn't care about them being together. And I think almost the whole middle 200 pages was just them hooking up. Like, I was just literally so bored. Like, I didn't care. And so this was definitely one of the more boring books that I read of the year for me. But like I said, I know a lot of people really love this one, so could just be a me thing. But that is the last book for today's video. So those are the top 10 worst books that I read this year. Like I said, I'm sorry if like your favorite book is on this list or something, but these are just my personal opinions. And so thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below. I'm currently doing new book videos every single day for the month of December, and I will see you next time.